All right, we are live. Welcome, everybody, to this pop-up episode of the Gunner Technology live stream. Today, we're going to be going through, again, our setup script that we're now calling GOATs. I don't know if you want to call it that, but I'm calling it GOATs.
We're going to have to clean up the names for a lot of this, but it'll just be naming changes.
To change it to GOATs?
Yeah. And I mean, there's some other, I want to change the names of some of the commands too, but yeah, we've got to change it to something better.
Yeah, I like GOATs. GOATs new. GOATs add user. Anyways, I guess we can start sharing your screen and start going through it.
Yep. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to jump it back and forth between some of these screens here. So now you should see the README.
Yes.
Which basically we're going to start after the prerequisites and the installation. So we have some prereqs here, installation here. Here's what we're actually going to be running. I'm going to walk through while it's running kind of what's like going forward, what we're going to do. So there's a number of options for the command, whether it's GOATs or Gunnerfy or whatever we're calling it. But the ones that are required are the project name, a unique email address, and an organization name. So the project name is pretty straightforward. And the project name is pretty straightforward. The email address just has to be a unique email address that you have access to. It can be any email address as long as it's not associated with an AWS account already. And then the organization name is kind of like the client. So if we take an example here, which we're going to do, our client is BetX, BetX LLC. So that's our client, and the actual project is called PropSwap. So using those, I'm going to run the Gunnerfy command. So let me just.
And I don't know if you mentioned, but the email has to be unique across all of AWS, right? As far as what accounts are set up.
Yeah, I was just saying the email address, there's two requirements. You have to have access to the email address. And well, actually, you don't have to have access to the email address. There's no verification. But if you ever want to remove the account, then you have to verify the address.
Right.
So it's
Do
recommended.
you want me to add that to your user ID, by the way, while we go through this? Do you want me to add that email to your user? Or you get you're the catch-all. Never mind.
Yep, exactly. So I'm just going to switch over to the terminal window now. And let me clear that out. So here I am, and I'm just going to basically run Gunnerfy, and then the project name, which we said is PropSwap. And then email will be propswapcody@gunnertech.com. And then the organization is going to be BetX LLC. Now, this is by convention that we do this, because what this command is actually going to do is going to create a new project since we don't have this project existing, and it's going to add a new environment, which is going to be the Kody environment, which is me, because it's going to be an environment that runs on my local machine.
And I guess maybe to touch on that, like every developer who works on one of these projects is going to have their own environment, because we don't want to be clearing out databases for other users when we clear ours out, or screw up other users when we're sort of deving on our own branch.
Right. Yeah. So each developer will have their own back-end architecture, so they don't have to worry about stepping on anyone else's toes. And the back-end architecture runs on AWS directly. So the problem would be if we only had one development environment, then I could be tinkering with the back-end architecture, which would screw up Derry, who is working on the same project. So that's why we have an environment per developer. So,
and I guess we'll get into what the background architecture is as we sort of run through.
Yeah, exactly. So let me just kick this off, and then this is going to run through a ton of stuff, and we don't have to sit here and watch it do all this. I'm going to kick it back over to sharing my browser window here.
I guess we could talk about what is being set up.
Yep. So
as the process is running.
So basically, it's going to go through. It's going to do a number of things. It's going to one of the requirements here, by the way, we say you have to have a master AWS account and have the AWS CLI set up. So in our case, our root account is called Gunner Technology, and every one who runs this script has to have an IAM user on the root account. For me, that's Cody. For Derry, that's Derry. And usually it's just the first name. In the case of a collision, it's just like first name and then last name kind of thing. So that's the requirement number 3 here. So what this is doing, what this script is actually doing is it's creating a new AWS account, and it's adding it to what's called AWS organizations. And it creates a new organizational unit, which is that O option. In this case, it's BetX LLC. It creates a new organizational unit and then places this new account underneath that organizational unit. So if you think about it, you have the in the way the AWS organizations work is the root is an actual account. So that's Gunner Technology. Then you have an organizational unit, which actually is not an account. It's just like a marker for structure called BetX. And let me actually, I'm going to interrupt myself here because I have to.
Or BetX LLC.
BetX LLC, yeah, exactly. Let me go back to the terminal window because I forgot we're going to add some stuff. So it's asking us now what kind of API we want to set up.
Do you want to run through what it did before this step?
Yeah, well, it basically did what I was talking about. It created a new account, created a new organizational unit, placed the new account underneath the organizational unit, and now we're walking through the process of setting up.
I guess handle all the Git configuration to make sure that the deploy will actually work.
Oh, yeah,
the push will actually work.
Yeah, exactly. So it configures your Git profile so you can access the repository because, again, you need a unique AWS profile to access the Git repository that this created as well. So you have the account creation, the AWS organization, you have the Git setup, and then we're now setting up Amplify. And unfortunately, Amplify makes you, which is an AWS product, it makes you walk through this process. We can't script this. So basically,
if you work on enough projects, that you'll get so good at running through these commands.
Yeah. So some of these are standard, right? Like there is some discretion involved here, but like for example, when you're running the script, you're always going to want to pick GraphQL. The name of the API, the default is fine. Again, you're almost always going to want to choose Cognito user pool. You're never going to want to have a production app that's based off the API key. So you're almost always want to choose Amazon Cognito user pool. I'm going to go through manual configuration for setting up the security configuration, just so you can see what's in there. So basically, I do not know what is this number 2 option. I know that we always want number 3 because we're always using storage and analytics and stuff like that. So always go with the first option. Again, the default names are fine. Allow unauthenticated logins. So here's the example, right? Imagine you have an app where, like, take Twitter, for example. Twitter is a good example. If you don't allow unauthenticated access, then you would have to be logged in to actually see tweets. We want people to be able to see tweets without them being logged in. So that's why we're going to say yes for this case. If you have an app where you don't want them accessing any data unless they're signed in, you would say no, don't allow unauthenticated logins. Does that make sense, the way I explained that?
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah, you can imagine like some of the clients we work with deal with medical records, where obviously the public shouldn't have access to medical records, and only users of the application should. So in that case, if it were built using Amplify, we'd have unauthenticated logins set to no for that.
In this case, we want people to be able to see the tickets that have been posted for the project without having to sign in. So we're going to say yes, allow that. But that's one where you'd have to choose based on your project needs. Do you want to enable third-party authentication providers in your identity pool? This would be if you wanted to allow like people to log in with like their Google account, their Facebook account, all that stuff. If you say yes, you have to be prepared with the app ID and all that other stuff from that. We don't have that requirement, and we don't have that information, so we're going to go no. But again,
do you know how difficult it is to set up if you select no and then want to add it later?
It's very easy.
Okay.
It's very easy. You just basically run amplify config auth, and it'll walk you through this whole process again. Please provide a username. Again, the names don't matter. Okay, so here's something that you may want to configure. how do you want people to sign in to your Cognito user pool? So think of this as your app. Do you want people to log in with their username? Do you want to log in with their email address, phone number, or email or it should say email or phone number, because that's what that means really, is email or phone number. So in this case, we're going to do email and phone number. But again, if you had an app that was like heavily username based, maybe you want them to enter their username.
What about username and email is an option?
What's that?
Username or email? Why that's not an option? Or like any of the three?
Yeah, because like with like I think Twitter, you can log in with username or email. I don't know. You could customize this. This is just the automated setup. You could implement something programmatically that checks if someone entered a username and then grab the email address and use that. But here's an example. Like if you're developing an app where like an account can have multiple email addresses, you'd want to use username instead of email address. The easiest one to use is email and phone number. So we're just going to go with that, email and phone number. Okay, so multi-factor. So you can either go off, on, or optional. Now, it's important to note that if you go on, it's required for all logins. You can't change it later without destroying the whole user pool. So you want to be very careful that that's like, you talk about for medical applications, you want to turn that on, required for all logins. This means whenever you log in, it's going to ask you for a code every single time. So I usually go with optional, just in case there's a requirement later on down the road in the project where we want to offer this to users. Optional allows them to say whether or not they want to use MFA when they're logging in. This is not, by the way, this does not affect registration. Registration requires you to confirm. This is just for actually logging in after you've registered.
And you can also sort of configure it on the app side, right? If you select optional, it makes it easier to sort of handle on the app side.
Right, exactly. That's exactly right. So MFA types. So time-based, the TOTP is more secure, but it's also more difficult for the users to use. SMS is basically, when you get that code, you get a text message saying, "Here's your code if you forgot your password," kind of thing. SMS is subject to what's called social engineering or social hacking, where you could basically call Verizon and be like, "Hey, I screwed up. I need you to reset my SIM." And then you could take over someone else's SIM and be like, then go reset your password. And when the app texts you your password or your code reset, it goes to the compromised SIM. So you could hijack someone's reset code that way. But again, that's an issue for like ultra secure apps.
Yeah, I was gonna say. So if you need to worry about that kind of stuff,
right, exactly. These are just defaults about what you want, what the reset message looks like. So we're just go with the default. So email-based users registration forgot password. So we're doing email login by email anyway, so it shouldn't even ask this question. But the option is, the second one is kind of weird, where every single time you register, you don't put in a password, you put in an email address, and it sends you a code to log in. You don't have a password. So that's what disabled is.
Weird.
Yeah. Disabled is like you never ever have a password. When you go to log in, you just say Cody@gunnertech.com, and they're like, "Cool, we just sent you a code. What is it?" And that's how you log in.
Interesting.
Yeah, but we're just going with password. Again, default for the text here. Do you want to override the default password policy for this user pool? We're going to say no, but this is like things like how long it has to be, which I think is 7, and then it requires an uppercase, lowercase,
number and special character.
And a special character. So their default's pretty good, so we're just going to leave the default. Okay, so
although I will say, like, most people aren't used to having to put in a special character, so it's usually a good idea to somehow display that on the password field.
Right. So this is, what attributes do you want to require for the person to sign up? We're just going to leave this as email. That's all we're going to require in order to sign up. But you can go through all these other options if you want.
Not even name for this app, huh?
What's that?
Not even name for this one?
Yeah. Yeah, you don't need that. And again, you can change that requirement, and you can make it an app requirement at the app level. This is just
Right.
at the actual Cognito pool level. Apps refresh token. This means basically if they don't sign out, they'll be signed out after 30 days automatically, just to force a refresh of the token. 30 days is fine. You can make it 90. You can make it 180. You can make whatever you want. Do you want to specify the user attributes this app can read and write? So I'm gonna say yes, just so we can go through it. So specify that. So this is the attributes that Cognito makes available to your app. And so we're not using any of this stuff. For example, we can add email verified in here just to see if their email has been verified. Phone number, we'll add that so we can just get that back to see if it's been verified. All the other stuff we have no use for. And so then it's going to ask what attributes we'd like to be able to make the app write. And we have no interest in updating any of this stuff. So we're just going to leave that as it is. OAuth, this is if you're actually like enabling other apps to kind of integrate with your app, and you want to provide an OAuth flow to authenticate those apps. And we're going to say no.
So that would be different than the third-party authentication providers above, in that you're not. The first one is logging in from Facebook or Twitter or Google or something like that. The
Right.
OAuth flow one is allowing people to log into other services using your app. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Do you have an annotated GraphQL schema? So you can say yes and actually plug in your schema right off the bat. We don't have one, so we're going to say no. Do you want a guided schema creation? I'm going to say yes, just so you can see the options, although we don't really need one. And then it gives you a number of options just to start with. I'm just going to start with the easiest one, because we're not going to actually use it at all. And then it says, do you want to edit it? I'm going to say no, but you can actually open it and edit it right away. I'm just going to say no for that. I hit the default. Sorry. So it opened it in my editor, but now I'm going to just hit enter to continue. So that's the amplify process. So basically now now we're going to set up pinpoint.
Yeah, there's a couple more. I think there's 4 more.
Yeah, pinpoint is for analytics purposes, so you can see what your users do. It's very similar to like Google Analytics. Apps need authorization to send analytics events. Do you want to allow guests and authenticated users to unauthenticated users to send analytics events? Yes, we do. So like we want to know like if a guest attempted to sign in and couldn't sign in, kind of thing. So we're going to use the default there. Okay, so now
it'd also just be for like general usage of the site, right? Somebody's logged out, and what pages are they hitting?
Please select. So now we're adding what's called Amplify storage. And so again, for our purposes, we always want to do content. We never want to set up a NoSQL database this way. So we're going to use content. A friendly name, we can go with the default. Names don't matter. Again, the bucket name does not matter. So we're just use the default. Okay, so who should have access to the storage? We're going to say, again, this is very similar to the app. So we're going to go auth and guest users. And we want, if you're signed in, we want you to be able to update, read, and delete content. So we're going to leave that as, we're going to select all of them. And then for people who aren't signed in, we just want them to be able to read the content. So this is going to take a few minutes, because this is actually deploying our Amplify setup via CloudFormation templates to AWS. It's actually going to step through it. It's going to take probably about 3 minutes or so. So I'm going to click over back to the README and just sort of talk about some other stuff with the goats or Gunnerfy or whatever we want to call it. Let me see, where did it go?
Goats, 100% goats.
So basically, I want to talk about what's going to happen next. So after this runs, we have a number of options. We're going to want to definitely create a staging environment. So you noticed in our Gunnerfy example, we didn't pass a stage. So it defaults, it creates a default stage that defaults to your IAM username, which I said was Cody. After this, we're going to want to create a staging environment. Basically, the staging environment is where things get tested. The client has access to seeing it. They can test it. This is also the stage where all of the developers on the project, so this is where the code comes together. So again, using the example of me or Derry and I on a project, Derry and me on a project, then basically we need to have a stage where we merge all our code and infrastructure changes together. That's our staging environment. Now, staging is just what we call it. You could set up a test environment if you wanted to, if that's what you wanted, where you wanted your code changes to come together. So this example uses fine-grained access control. So basically what this means is taking this example, we're creating a Cody environment for prop swap, and then we're going to create a staging environment for prop swap. Now, after that, Derry could run on his laptop right now. Gunnerfy knew he could run the same command I did, and it would create an environment for prop swap on his local machine. But because I set up the staging environment, he would not have access to it because he's not placed in what's called the AWS group that has access to the staging environment. That's another command where we have to actually give him access to the staging environment. And
Although
again,
realistically, like in the scenario where I'm, say, a junior dev who shouldn't have direct push access to staging, that's exactly how it should be set up. Where I would have to submit pull requests and stuff for my code to actually be merged into the staging branch.
Right. Exactly. Actually, so the staging environment. So yeah, you're exactly right, and I'll get to that in a second.
Yep.
The second way.
Sorry, go ahead.
With his lax access control, this allows you to be a lot more. It allows you to skip adding people, having to add people that they can add themselves directly. So this G option, this is where we actually specify the group name instead of auto-generating one. So we could have created a group called prop swap admins, right? And so then so I could have run Gunnerfy new without a stage and then passed a group prop swap admins. And then again, I could set up a staging environment and pass it the same group prop swap admins. And then Derry could actually just run Gunnerfy new prop swap and pass the group name prop swap admins. And he wouldn't have to be added to the group because you pass the group name, it automatically adds him to the group name. So that's more if you want to have lax access control and you trust all your developers and everything like that. You can pass the G option and have them pass the same G option as well.
What if I run it with I'll ask you that offline.
Okay, so the next one here is okay. So Sentry is something you can add after the fact, and that's basically an error reporting tool. So this is cool because if you have any errors in production or staging, it emails the team and says, "Here's what went wrong with a stack trace." So it's good to have that set up, but it's a totally different totally different setup or a totally different command. The important thing to remember is when you create your Sentry project, use the project name that you use to create this project. It has to match in order to work. So this one's called prop swap. It needs to be prop swap when you create the Sentry project. One of the things you're going to see at the end of this process is going to ask us if we want to set up an RDS database. We're not going to need one for this project, so we're going to say no. But our setup script has the ability to integrate with a SQL database, an Aurora NoSQL database, or an Aurora database, a SQL database. And this will actually allow you to run migrations, very similar to Rails if you're familiar with that. And then this amplify API command will actually generate your GraphQL data source for accessing it.
That's so
the
cool.
next
Goats is the best.
What's that?
Goats is awesome. That's one of the best parts of this entire process. The RDS schema migrations. I guess migrations are like one of the cool parts.
Oh yeah. And yeah, and you literally just write Gunnerfy generate migration, and then the name of the migration, like create pets table, and then the statement you pass is literally the SQL statement that you want to run when the migration runs.
You know, Frank mentioned on the live stream today that SQL is sort of becoming the query language de rigueur of like big data.
Yep.
Uh, That's that's fascinating to me because it seemed like maybe like as recent as like 2 or 3 years ago, it was NoSQL all the way.
Yeah, well, like that's the weird thing is like NoSQL has been like NoSQL is becoming, and I'm going to get in trouble by saying this. The hype behind NoSQL is now related more to primary data storage for like your application. So like when your application writes directly to, in our case, it's RD or DynamoDB, which is a NoSQL data store.
Yeah.
And so it's key based, and that's like the source. But for retrieval purposes, you want to have it propagate to like a SQL type, like a SQL type store, like we were talking about Elasticsearch and how that's going to support SQL statements.
Yep.
Or again, like the they see RDS as the data lake, like just a sea of data, and then to make reason out of that data for analytic purposes, you would stream it through like Kinesis or something like that, or Redshift, which are SQL based querying language. So it's like NoSQL is the hype for putting data, and SQL is the big hype for querying data, which makes sense because you don't query data with a NoSQL database. You don't. You look it up. You don't query it. So it makes sense.
So it's like NoSQL for writes and reads and SQL for queries. Anything beyond that, basically?
Yeah, it's yep. NoSQL for key-based retrieval
Yeah, yeah. Simple
and
reads, I guess, is what I
storage,
should have said.
and SQL for queries. That's right.
Yeah.
So right now, if we kick it back over, I want to kick it back over to the script, which is still running. The what it's doing right now is, are you seeing? Yeah. So right now,
I'm seeing your face. I'm not seeing the screen yet.
oh, okay.
There you go.
So right now, it ran through all of the Amplify stuff, and now it's using the serverless framework to create additional options and deployments. And right now, for example, you can see it's stuck with this one right here. This is the longest part of this. This is creating a CloudFront distribution. So a CloudFront distribution is basically a CDN. And the reason we want to set up a CDN is because our app will support uploads. And rather than having a user request the uploaded content directly from S3, which is fast but not extraordinarily fast, we're going to have them get the files from the CDN, which is lightning fast. But the problem is because the CDNs are global, they have to set up the nodes across the known universe, and so that's why it takes like 20 minutes for that to set up. All right, let me kick back over to the README here. So the next part of this after we set up the staging environment would be adding a team member, because we're going to use fine grained access control. So basically, the creator of the stage you want to share is going to run this command, which is basically just like Gunnerfy users add, and then you pass the username, which is the IAM username on the root account. In our scenario, that'll be Dairy, and the stage you want to give them access to. In our case, this would be staging. Once that command runs, Gunnerfy will spit out a command to send to the developer, and they would run that, and they would then have access to that stage. Maybe that's sufficient, but most likely they're going to want to also add their own personal environment. So they would run this once they add the project. They would then add they would run the same command that we're doing right now. Gunnerfy includes some things for development as well. So when you're working locally, you're going to run Gunnerfy develop. Gunnerfy develop is basically a wrapper around the watch command that makes sure that whenever, this sets up, I should step back. Gunnerfy new sets up a back-end environment and two front-end environments. One front-end environment is a React client. The other front-end environment is a React native client. So when you are making API changes to your GraphQL schema and deploying them, because you don't have a local environment, you have your own dev environment on AWS. So when you deploy your backend changes, what Gunnerfy actually does is rebuilds your GraphQL schema for you, which is really cool. But it has to send the new schema to the client, to both clients. So Gunnerfy develop watches for backend changes and then pushes those changes to the clients running on your local machine. So basically, that's how you start the backend, Gunnerfy develop. To start the React client, you just change directories into the React client and then run stage equals the stage you want to start, and then npm run start. Similarly with the React native client, you run stage equals stage you want to run, npm run, and the simulator you want it to run on, whether it's iOS or Android. At the start of an iteration, again, we're an agile shop here, so this is kind of how we start our iterations. So basically, you're going to git checkout and you're going to check out the base stage, which in our case is staging, and then you're going to run git pull, so you have the latest staging changes on your local machine, and then you're going to check out your local environment, which in my case would be Kodi. Git checkout Kodi, and then git merge staging. What this does is, don't forget, we all submitted our pull requests, and then the project manager or the lead developer, they're the ones who merged it on staging. So now we got to get everyone else's changes for this iteration. That's how we do this. Then finally, what you want to do is, and really you shouldn't have to do this, but just to make sure, you want to do an amplify. This is telling Amplify which environment you're on. Amplify, env checkout, and then your local branch. So Kodi in my case. Again, you really should have no reason to be on staging anyway, but just to make sure. So then that's the start of the iteration. This is how we work on issues. So everything is in a Redmine ticket tracker, or you don't have to use Redmine. You can use GitHub, Jira, whatever. They all offer issue numbers. So then as a local developer, I would create a new branch, and the name of that branch is the issue number. I would work on it, blah, 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 blah. If I make back-end changes, again, remember, we don't have a back-end on our local environment, on our local machine. So if I make back-end changes, I have to run Gunnerfy deploy back-end. This will push all of my, this will push a new infrastructure change to the back-end. So then again, once I'm done working, I commit the changes again on that topic branch. And the commit message should just be closes and then the issue number, so we can go back and look up what issue it was. Then you're going to check out your stage again. So then git checkout Kodi, and then I'm going to merge that branch into my repository.
Yeah.
And then push those changes. Really, the git push is optional. You don't have to push the changes up. It's just good to have it in case your machine dies before the end of the iteration, so you have the changes remotely, so they're secure. And then finally, just get rid of the topic branch. That deletes the branch. So then you're going to again repeat this on every single issue throughout the iteration. Bless you.
Did that come through? How'd that come through?
I think you're on. Maybe you're on your.
Oh, that's so dumb. I'm on my internal mic instead of
your internal mic. Yeah. So then at the end of the iteration, each developer will run this command, which is Gunnerfy git submit, and then the name of the iteration, which is just the date in this format. Bless you.
How did that come through?
And then finally, T is the target stage. So in our case, it would be staging. This is where you want your pull request to be submitted. So you would do a target stage of staging. So now as a developer, you're done. with the iteration. Now the project manager, the lead developer has to go through the pull requests and either accept or reject them. And this is how they do it. Basically, oh, sorry, this get submit will give you as the developer a request ID. You don't necessarily need to know that because the lead developer will be able to look up the requests. But when they approve the pull request, they don't have to use the GUI. They can just run Gunnerfy, get approved, and then pass the request ID and then the stage that they're allowing it for. So this would be get approved, iteration or request ID 2 branch staging. And so then the lead developer is going to do that for every single pull request. And then finally, after it's all done, they're going to run Gunnerfy get tag, which is going to create a tag for that iteration.
You might have mentioned it while I was sneezing. But where's is he getting the request ID from code commit?
Yeah. So exactly, code commit will have the request IDs. The generally speaking, what I imagine the workflow is usually as, because the developer could finish their iteration at any time. So like I said, Gunnerfy get submit will spit out a request ID, and then you can email the the lead developer and say, I'm done with my tickets. Here's my request ID.
So just track them during the iteration and then send them along. Might be a good way to do it.
And that would be, yeah, exactly. So like, and again, like let's say our iterations they start at Wednesday and they end Tuesday just before midnight. Mm-hmm. So let's say on Thursday, let's say you're the lead, and I finished all my tickets on Thursday. I run Gunnerfy get submit, and it says, here's your request ID. I ping you on chat or email or Slack or whatever. I say, I'm done with my tickets. Here's my request. Here's my pull request ID. You don't have to wait for the end of the iteration to check out my code. You can like review it. Oh, that looks good. I approve that request ID. And then maybe Anthony finishes all his on Friday.
Right.
Anthony says, here's my request ID. So yeah, it kind of like depends on how you want to handle that. But the request ID is what's key. And just as I was finishing that up, the deploy finished. So let me switch back over to that. So here's what I was talking about. It says, would you like to set up an RDS cluster? We're going to say no. But if you say yes, it'll walk you through setting up an RDS SQL cluster. So we're going to say no. And so basically, it should finish here in 1 second. We set up the React Native client. It set up the React client. It set up the serverless backend. And now we're all finished.
Is there a reason you didn't set up the RDS for this project?
Because we don't need it. There's no.
That would make sense. That's a good reason.
Yeah, there's no SQL. There's no SQL need for the project. So I think I may have added a command that I haven't documented for after the fact, adding a SQL database. If not, it's on the project list. So that's it. Now I have an environment set up. I can start developing as is. But like I said, we definitely want to set up a staging environment. So again,